Both for joining us. We are not quite at full capacity here, but I think we're going to get started. We've got maybe actually only one of us, I think, who's going to be coming, not yet arrived. So you may see somebody walking in a few minutes. But we invited Betsy Rosen back and Megan as well to help us think a little bit more about the ideas that we've been batting about with Representative Pearl's bill. So you've, I think, had a chance to read that bill, understand what the challenges are with doing anything that changes the legislature doing anything to try and directly change curriculum, but also understand maybe what our intentions are and can help us think about, other ways we might get there. So if that's enough of an introduction, if you want to jump right in, please do.
Thank you, and thanks for having us today. For the record, my name's Betsy Rosenbluth. I'm the project director of Vermont Feed, and I am based at Shelburne Farms. And Megan, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Megan Camp. I'm the Executive Vice President and Program Director at Shelburne Farms, and have here for this conversation. And thank you for your interest in supporting Farm to School. But I'm here for some, what I would say, of the historical record, having been involved in Farm to School since the early days in ag education.
Right. We thought we would take a few minutes after speaking with the chair to talk a little bit about where are we with ag education, farm to school education from what we know, and how are we approaching this and where are some opportunities. So I have some slides, and Laura, it sounds like it's easier for you to share the slides than for me.
It's actually would be best if you could do it. I've made you a co-host, so you have permission and you should be able to.
Okay. Let's see if we can get this going. All right. Does that look right?
That looks good. Yeah, you see the slide.
Great. So often I'm going to speak today about we, and I think sometimes in Farm to School, the we is confusing. So I just want to reinforce that Vermont Feed is a Farm to School partnership of Shelburne Farms and NOFA Vermont. And Shelburne Farms also does a long array of professional learning with educators in all of our programs through our Institute for Sustainable Schools. We support about 1,500 teachers each year through all our programs in Vermont and across the country and even around the globe. So we're building on that experience when we're talking with you. And through Vermont Feed and NOFA Vermont, okay. We'll just see if I can, there we go. We support the Vermont Farm to School and Early Childhood Network. So that's a place since 2009 that we have been coordinating with about 40 different organizations across the entire state agencies, nonprofits, teachers, schools, to advance our shared goal, which is this. So I'm just going to touch on it because I think it gives you the context for the curriculum integration, and it's about connecting. It's by 2030, every educational community in Vermont is connecting classrooms, cafeterias, and communities with equitable access to integrated food system education. So that's key. Community-based learning, which we'll talk about, and 30% local food purchasing that promotes climate resilience and social justice. And we've talked a lot, I think, at Farm to School Awareness Day about the local food incentive and local purchasing And today we're going to focus on the classroom and a little bit on the community component. So the foundation of Farm to School in Vermont is connecting classroom, cafeteria, and community, because that's what's going to give us this staying power in a school. And the idea is to embed it so it lives beyond any one champion parent or champion teacher, but becomes part of the culture. It becomes part of job descriptions, which we're seeing, and the expectation of both students and families that that's part of their school. And I think when you talk a little bit more this afternoon or after us with Woodstock High School and some of the things they're doing, and there's a few other educators and principals we can refer to you that are seeing that kind of shift where food systems and wellness and ag education are really embedded in the school. So what does it look like in a classroom? Farm to School could be about learning about social studies by studying indigenous foodways. It could be learning math through cooking. It could be the engineering students designing and building a solar greenhouse. Sometimes it looks like, just literacy in the garden, or learning business schools, selling produce that the kids are harvesting from a garden. But it's integrated into the priorities of the school, and that varies district by district. And so our support has been to work with, much more tailored and individual, is working with the educators, the teachers and administrators in the school on what are your priorities and how does Farm to School help you do that, and creating the time and the space to do some planning for that curriculum integration. In the cafeteria, you've heard a lot from some of the incredible school nutrition directors we have in the state, but there's also a lot of taste testing. There's ways for students to be providing some of the food, like on a salad bar. There's a lot of opportunities for education as the cafeteria gets seen as one of the largest classrooms in a school. And then there's community-based learning opportunities, whether it's field trips to farms or kids planting at a farm and returning to harvest, or pen pals with farmers, or students harvesting from their own garden and preparing food for local food pantries. There's a million ways that schools are doing some of that community-based learning and community partnerships. And you heard on Farm to School Awareness Day, if you remember, from the farmer Ashley, who's talking about, she's selling produce to the school, but she's also in the classroom and connecting with the kids. So in 2018, the Vermont Department of Health, as a part of the Farm to School network, helped us measure how are we doing towards our goal. And so they sent out a survey to every principal in every school in the state with a set of questions. So it's never perfect, but at least gave us a snapshot for the 2016-17 school year. How are we doing? And I'm just going to share a little bit of what we've learned about curriculum integration. So we looked at 5 areas, right? And these are the 5, but we're going to focus today on curriculum. And we found that, I think this whole presentation is a little bit glass half full or half empty. Like, we're making really good progress, and yet we have a lot of opportunity to do more. And I think in Vermont, we have a lot of spread and awareness of Farm to School, but not the depth that we're looking for. So here we go. What we found towards curriculum and community integration, that at least 61% of Vermont schools, and this is all the way from pre-K through high school, had at least some Farm to School programming integrated into the curriculum, and 68% with the community. Let's see if I can get there we go. That 53% of schools at the time of the survey had participated in farm field trips or ag-based learning in the community within the last 2 years. And 47% in the past year. And that in Vermont, 65% of schools said they had a connection to a farm or a farmer. So that's great. But of course, we're wondering, this is Vermont, why isn't it 100%? So we continue to do our work. And some of the details that we were looking at, again, as I mentioned, is there's a lot of interest in farm to school learning activities. There's a lot of activities happening, but a lot of room for growth in terms of embedding it in the overall curriculum as part of the school's learning priorities. And this is just a little more detail about looking at the frequency. Is it like every spring there's one field trip, or is it one teacher who has a garden but not the whole school? So that's what we're striving for, is to really look school-wide at some of that culture change. And I think there's a, excuse me one second. There's some examples around the state where you start to see farm to school built across all of the grades and all the subjects. And it makes me think of Sharon Elementary, where every grade is involved in farm to school. The school has a culture of wellness. It's, you know, farm to school is part of a larger effort around mindfulness and wellness and outdoor learning opportunities. And it's part of job descriptions. You see that the parents are engaged with it. And that's the kind of culture change that we sort of hold up of, you know, can we move in that direction? And I thought this was just interesting. I mentioned all the ways that farm to school gets incorporated in curriculum. In this survey, it was mostly within, not surprisingly, health and family and consumer science courses. It's happening in the cafeteria with all that incredible effort through the school nutrition programs. And it's happening in science, which is quite natural. A lot of phys ed programs are incorporating taste tests and outdoor time in gardens and things like that. And then you can see there's room for growth in some of the other areas. I mean, mathematics doesn't show up here, but there's some amazing courses where kids are learning statistics on a dairy farm or in a maple sugaring operation and things like that. And, you know, what we have found, and I think Megan can elaborate on, you know, giving people curricular resources or, you know, a goal or standard doesn't help create change without the kind of support and professional learning opportunities that give, again, teachers that time and space to do that planning. So I mentioned Sharon. Sharon also creates a lot of planning time for teachers to sit and create those lessons and to coordinate across, you know, other teachers in the school. So again, progress and more room for opportunity. And in Vermont, you know, we do have opportunities for curriculum integration. We're going to talk a little bit more about the Vermont Agency of Agriculture Farm to School Grants Program that provides technical assistance, which means that each year we're providing curriculum integration for the schools that are grantees, and those are tailored to those schools. So if a school is rewriting their science curriculum, we might do professional learning with school-wide about incorporating food systems within that. Or social emotional learning is a priority. Or in Addison Central, they have an international baccalaureate focus. So how can farm to school be embedded in that? So that's what we mean by curriculum integration. And that's happening with the Vermont Farm to School Grants Program. It's also happening at Shelburne Farms and with Vermont Feed in what we call the Farm to School Institute. So each year, maybe five, 6 Vermont schools are participating in a year-long professional learning program that provides some of the peer connections for teachers who are working on integration in the curriculum, and to integrate that school-wide with what's happening in the cafeteria and community. We've been running a dairy in the classroom program, and we can talk in more detail if you're interested in that, getting kids on dairy farms and helping teachers who are a little bit shy of doing some of that, those activities themselves in the classroom, so they have support for doing that. You mentioned, I heard, which I was so pleased, the Junior Iron Chef program that's been going now for 13 years. And we've seen maybe 8,000 to 10,000 Vermont teens, middle and high school, participating in that program, learning cooking skills and what local food is. So there's a lot happening in Vermont. And again, I think our goal is to make that more consistent, make it deeper, and see how we can support educators and administrators to make that school-wide. There are tons of curricular resources. So Vermont Feed has a whole page just on curricular resources for teachers. There are great activities and guides. And so it's less about, I mean, it's nice to curate those for teachers, but it's much more important to work with them on integrating within their priorities, their classroom priorities, their school priorities, how Farm to School can help them achieve that. So it's not seen as an add-on in a very crowded curriculum, but really a way to help achieve what they're trying to do. And I think Jess and Ian really talked a little bit about that. Some of the, curriculum without the support and the planning and the integration is not going to achieve the change that I think we are all hoping for. And then we have a lot of tools and templates. So this is just, it won't make sense probably from where you're sitting, but just using understanding by design. Like, how do you support teachers in thinking about what are the big questions? What are we trying, what do we want students to be learning? How do we assess that? Sort of following some of what AOE was talking about last week. So that's embedded. We work, closely together so that teachers are supported in what they have to be doing. And then I'm going to turn things over to Megan to talk a little bit about what we're seeing as opportunities for support and some of the things that are coming up.
Before we hear from Megan, does the committee have any questions for Betsy?
I just had one.
Yeah, Representative O'Brien.
Betsy, in the beginning it said FTS and EC. What's EC?
Early childhood.
Okay.
So today I'm really focusing the curriculum on pre-K 12, but the network is Farm to School and early childhood, and we provide very similar support to early childhood educators on integrating farm to early childhood within, their activities with students in their early childhood programs.
I'm just wondering, as I hear you walk through, it's very helpful. Do you feel that there are geographic, there are distance barriers at all, given Shelburne Farms is in populated area, relatively populated area of the state? So in fact, are school districts that are located in, say, the Northeast Kingdom or Southern Vermont able to take advantage or taking advantage of the opportunities that you're helping to connect them with?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. That's where the power of our network is really works. And so, for example, in 2020, we had a contract, the network had a contract with the Agency of Education to develop some curricular modules for teachers across the state. And so we work with Green Mountain Farm to School in the Northeast Kingdom, Vital Communities, Upper Valley area. There's an educator in Central Vermont at Driftwood Farm that we work with a lot, Central Vermont, and Food Connects, et cetera. Franklin County has Healthy Communities. And the idea was to create together some consistent support for teachers and to share our learning so that we can do that. And I would say, I looked at all the schools in Vermont who've received Agency of Ag grants or the Farm to School, have attended the Farm to School Institute. There's been like 173 Vermont schools in all 14 counties, serving about 145,000 students. So we're happy about that. I will say the areas that we see geographically with the lowest amount of participation in those programs is that, and little less so lately, but Rutland-Bennington corridor. And there isn't that kind of farm to school support organization anymore. You know, we had Northshire Grows and some various organizations in Rutland that have turned over. So we're focused on building that capacity and identifying those folks. So in all of these programs, schools have a coach in their geographic region that's supporting them to create the change that they're trying to make with Farm to School. And so as we recruit and build that coaching capacity in the southwest corner of the state, you know, hopefully over time we will build that on the ground support. But the Farm to School coordinators in a district or an SU really makes so much difference in helping schools weather change and really build their Farm to School programs. So those coordinators are supported in the Farm to School grants program, but those grants end. And so I think we are thinking a lot about how do we support that kind of Farm to School coordination everywhere geographically in the state. So we work statewide, we work with our partners statewide, but we're really paying attention to where there are areas that are not participating as fully. So Bennington, Rutland are really participating in farm to early childhood. Probably Bennington is the model in some ways in some of the programs there, but the K-12 schools, and I think some of the under-resourced schools in the Northeast require more support.
Right. Representative O'Brien.
Betsy, I noticed on that 2018 Vermont Integrated Food, Farm and Nutrition assessment that was coming out of the Department of Health. So I wondered, not the Agency of Education. So does the AOE go to Vermont Feed and the Department of Health and ask you to be partners, or just how does that work as far as, you know, integrating it into a curriculum or quantifying how successful you are?
Yeah, so we were lucky to have the amazing minds at the Department of Health who are doing data analysis. You saw that in COVID. Paul Medow, I think, was really involved with that. And he was the Department of Health has been a partner in Farm to School for a very long time. And so they were able to say, you know, we have the capacity, we have a PhD student. As part of our collaboration all together, we can oversee this. And, you know, we were all advising and part of it, but they did the bulk of the work. Agency of Education has not had that capacity. I mean, I think it's really a direct conversation with them. They're supportive. When we passed the legislation that created the local food incentive, it created a position, a grants position in the AOE. That's Connor Floyd, who's testified. And so now AOE more and more is able to participate in network activities in the Farm to School Institute and other places. So I don't have a complete answer. I think it's more of a conversation with the agency, but it has made a tremendous difference having that that role filled at AOE, that's really paying attention to other things, but to farm to school in early childhood as well.
Thank you.
All right, I'm not seeing any other hands, so if you want to pass it off to Dr. Camp.
Great, thanks. And this is really more just an opportunity to reinforce sort of at the high level some of the points that Betsy's already made. I think as I introduced myself as sort of, I'm here as the historian, having been involved for many years, sort of in ways of supporting what we now call farm to school. And I did just want to point out that Vermont was the very first state to pass legislation in farm to school. We had a very active partnership between the Agency of Education and the Vermont Department of Health and the Agency of Natural Resources and the Vermont Agency of Food and Markets many years ago in 2000. And we actually, in the state of Vermont, passed, at that time, we had something called the Vermont Framework of Standards and Learning Opportunities. And Vermont was the very first state in 2000 to actually have a sustainability standards and also an ag and natural resource standard, and an important one, which was called Understanding Place. And as you learn, that was an initiative that didn't happen with support of many legislators, but happened working very closely with the Agency of Education and the Vermont Board of Education to pass those. But we now use different standards in the state of Vermont. But I think there's just a long history of the state supporting agriculture literacy and what used to be called ag in the classroom. And the success of that has really been between this partnership between the different public-private partnerships and partnerships amongst the agencies, not just one agency taking the lead, but having it be collaborative. So we, as I mentioned, we're the first state to fund and pass legislation that actually provided grants to the state. And once again, that was an interagency initiative. And the funds, as you know, are the grants are awarded through the Vermont Agency of Food and Markets, so of Ag and Food and Markets. So we've been able to, as Betsy said, be able to find see the impact of those grants over time. And I think when we look at that map, and as Betsy said, it's either half full or it's half empty. You know, if you look at where there's the most activity around farm to school, it has been the schools have received grants. And one of the things, as we all know, is to make change in the classroom and to make change in schools isn't just as we learned, it isn't necessarily having a new standard or requiring anything in curriculum, but it really comes with professional learning with teachers and ongoing coaching and actually whole school professional learning, not just with teachers, but also with teachers and all the staff and administration as well. So one of the things that we see that's really needed, and we have to also say it's amazing how far we've come, but as Betsy said, we still have a long way to go, is that the most success that we've seen has been with schools who have been have farm to school coaches or coordinators. And also where there's strong administrative and support. Betsy had mentioned Sharon Elementary as an example, but they had received a grant. They'd also gone to the Farm to School Institute, which allowed the staff and the faculty to take the time, which is so critical in schools for planning. As we know, it's a very crowded curriculum and a very crowded day in schools. And in addition to that, they also had strong leadership support. And when they had a transition in principals, it was actually written into the job description of the new principal to be able to continue to support farm to school. So it really has to break through what is curriculum and then become part of the culture of a school. And that's really what we're trying to do, to be able to see sort of long-term staying power, is creating that culture within the school, within the community, to support farm to school initiatives. One of the areas that I think could even use more attention, we talk a lot about pre-K through grade 12, but we also want to talk about the career and technical opportunities and career pathways. We've seen a number of opportunities to revise some of the curriculum to include some of the outcomes and goals of farm to school within the career and technical centers. And the Agency of Education over time has provided support. One example is there's so much changing in the industry of the maple industry. So we've recently been working with Extension to revise some of the curriculum that's available for career and technical centers to keep up with the excitement of that industry. And then the last point is a lot happens within the school. I mean, Junior Yard Chef is a wonderful initiative that engages students in communities and schools and farm to school. But there's also many other ways in which things can happen after school hours, and as well as we see within the increasing demand and importance of summer programs as well. It's just not limited to the traditional school day. Betsy, you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I might just make a couple of points that we are also this year, we received a grant from USDA to work with farm-based educators on how to better host schools on farms. So we're working with teachers, but we're also working with farmers who are interested in those field trips and those connections, so that it can be as successful a partnership as possible. And we have sort of a easy entry for schools has been Harvest of the Month. So we're hoping in the coming year to really refresh our Harvest of the Month materials, which are very specific for educators, for early childhood providers, as well as, the purchasing component, and really work with schools who just want to take that very first step to get started. And Harvest of the Month has been a Vermont program that helps schools to be doing that. So there's a couple sort of small activities, I think, that reinforce our work with teachers and administrators as well. So we just wanted to save a lot of time for discussion and questions from you all.
Great. We have a question here from Representative Lipsky.
Well, the slide just changed. Thank you. You had two acronyms. One was TA, another was something else, and then things to move on to was HOM, TA, and PL. What do those mean? I apologize for not understanding that.
Oh, no apology at all. Just trying to fit things on a slide. So HOM is Harvest of the Month. And so that's what I had just referred to. In Vermont has a wonderful website, Vermont Harvest of the Month, where you can see some of the materials that we provide to folks. TA is technical assistance, and PL is professional learning. So I just want to, again, thank this committee and the support that's been happening for many years to fully fund the Farm to School and early childhood grants, because through that, we're able to do the kind of professional learning, the PL, and the technical assistance and coaching to schools that are grantees and then also beyond. So if we have a workshop in a grantee school, that'll be open up to the whole district and sometimes to the whole SU. So we try to reach as many educators as possible in those workshops and activities that we're doing through the grants program. So that really works.
Representative Rice.
Yeah, I'm wondering if, so Megan mentioned that there is a sort of a clear picture that the schools that are applying for and getting these grants and working with coaches and then investing in coordinators are the schools that are sort of elevating their farm to school curriculum and really building it out across grade levels. I'm just wondering if you're seeing trends in which schools those are and which schools aren't, taking advantage of the opportunities, aren't applying for the grants, aren't sort of starting with those early steps. If you see those trends, what you think we might do to sort of bridge that gap or lift up the schools that haven't been able to take advantage of the opportunities yet?
Betsy, do you want to answer, or do you want me to jump in? I think you're on mute.
Yeah. Either way, I mean, I can add in or I can start. I really think it comes down to leadership a little bit. I mean, we've had tiny, very rural schools participating and taking advantage of the grants from every part of the state. And it often comes from a principal who's interested or a champion teacher that has to build a team. Sometimes those individual teachers or, school nutrition directors aren't successful right off in creating a school-wide team. It takes longer. So they might participate individually in some of the professional development programs, but take longer to build that school-wide team that can then apply for the grants or the full institute. So we have been working. We make sure there's opportunities for schools that don't have that school-wide interest yet, to start to support identify and support the individual champions and support them to build that. And to work with, again, our partners, always finding that local partner who can provide more support to the school to build that. So it's a little vague answer around leadership because it isn't one place. I mean, it certainly helps for administrators to understand the value of farm to school and embrace it. And, we've been working on communicating that with school leadership. I think that's really important, but it doesn't always start there. Megan, if you want to add into some of that.
And one of the things I think that we've begun to see, but we haven't, it would be interesting to better document, is that we've tried to create and support schools that have really robust farm to school programs that have staying power, so that we can begin to track the benefits of those schools. And I think that one of the things, and we share perhaps, Betsy, with this committee, the article that was written by Jen Cirillo a number of years ago that went into the School Nutrition Association publication. But what we've begun to see is that principals see the benefits in so many ways, as I mentioned earlier, really creating a healthy culture within the school. So it's things like absentee rate going down, less sick days, higher level student engagement, stronger community partnerships. And so the benefits are so high that we often will see when we see a change, and it can also, one of the strategies is looking within a school district and being able to support. This work has been shifted from individual school buildings to more school districts, so that more of those benefits can also be both tracked, but also shared, but also inspire the other schools within that district. And I think one of the key parts that Betsy also mentioned is that the coaching can happen in all different ways. It can be an internal coach within the school, It can be a community partner that's provided it in the coaching, like the Farm to School Network with the Upper Valley Farm to School program and Green Mountain Farm to School program and Food Connects down in Southern Vermont and Healthy Communities. But what we really have to look at is where does that long-term support come from? And I feel like it's not necessarily an issue where a school isn't excited about Farm to School. It's really something they'd love to do. It's really about capacity. And so that's where we have to be creative, is how do we best provide that support and capacity for those schools who want to begin building and strengthening and expanding their Farm to School. I wouldn't say there's a lack of interest in really any school in the state of Vermont.
Yeah, and I think it's such a good question. I think it's really thinking about, we don't have the answer, like how do we build that capacity within the districts and SUs for Farm to School coordination that can internally really support the growth and integration of these programs. So the outside organizations really help support the school, but you have to build that capacity within the school. And I think that's I might stop there. I'm not sure how to answer your question. What can this committee do to help support that? But I do think it's a key area that I've been talking, especially to the Vermont Agency of Agriculture about, because you can get that support through the grants program, but the grants program is short-term. It's not long-term. So how do we provide some kind of support for the districts to maintain that? And sometimes those coordinators are teachers, sometimes they're in the school nutrition department, sometimes it's a separate garden or sustainability coordinator. You know, it varies a lot. It doesn't have to look the same, but it's a key role within the school that's supporting all of these activities.
Representative O'Brien, did you have a question?
Yeah. Betsy and Megan, we learned yesterday sort of how at the AOE that the system works with, you have the standards and then curriculums are designed essentially to meet the proficiency in those standards. So I'm wondering, what have you heard from the curriculum builders and teachers as far as the effectiveness of Farm to School education, both in that sort of quantifiable success of meeting standards? Like, is it seen as like, wow, this worked really well for the amount of time or the way the students could get into it, so that nutrition standards are met, or the shape standards or science, or is there pushback from the teachers and curriculum builders that it's great, but it's not a home run as far as meeting those standards? We're getting it with less time and with textbooks or whatever it is. The proficiencies we're hitting are done in other ways. I just wondered if there's tension there, if there's sort of an agreement that, yeah, let's do more of this, more Farm to School.
Well, I think what we've learned or have learned over time, there's no shortage of standards for a classroom teacher, and that really Farm to School is used as one of those sort of integrators for a teacher being able to integrate in many of the standards that they have, whether it be in their science, as Betsy said, it shows up in so many different ways within the curriculum. I think that one of the things that we have found with teachers is that Farm to School, because it isn't just in the classroom, it's also in the cafeteria and it's also in the community, that it is a really effective way of making some of the curriculum content relevant and meaningful, and finding pathways for engaging all students, and even some of those students who might not otherwise be as deeply engaged in some of their academic work. So I think that those are the parts of the stories that we're trying to lift up. Once again, is to saying that, and it's not really much different than it is in any career. It's much easier to see change when someone, it's peer to peer, classroom to classroom, school to school, where schools have been able to see the promises of some of the practices of farm to school versus it having to be something that was mandated. That's something we're very cautious about because, over time that question always comes up, but the sort of the efficacy of that strategy haven't seen as much as the results as really some of the more incentive to good learning. And also as a way to help teachers cover, that really crowded curriculum by providing, rich learning experiences like farm to school.
Representative Rice.
I'm wondering if you've engaged in thinking around sort of like, what does it look like if a student is in a place where K through 12, this is really built into the curriculum, they're hitting all the pieces we want them to be hitting over the course of their educational career, and they graduate. What do we want them to take away from that? What do we want
Good
this
question.
bit of education to be? And then are we tracking this work having happened in Vermont for longer than it's happened in a lot of other places? Have we been tracking whether that's happening with sort of best practices currently in place?
Mm-hmm.
Go ahead, Megan.
Do you want to go ahead, or I can? Well, I think I always think about Secretary Ross, who was very passionate about farm to school when he's in his role, but always just talking about one of the most important outcomes for farm to school was ag literacy, and that better sort of deepening understanding and appreciation of agriculture. We would see the impacts of that. And that would be something that would be an outcome of farm to school. And then, of course, we're looking at one of the most important outcomes, which is, as we know, we've talked about and have documented, is the health benefits of farm to school. And really looking at this as a long-term, in many ways, preventative prevention program for reducing diet-related diseases, but just better, healthier choices that will be lifelong, that can be developed in the pre-K-12 time in life. So those are some of the other benefits. And I think the one that was very important when we went a number of years ago, as I said, we were developing these sustainability standards, which included both ag and natural resources, but it was also one that was really unique to Vermont. And when we have talked to schools and anyone involved in education, both students, parents, communities, that there's something that what we refer to as understanding place or sense of place. And that really is an outcome of farm to school as well, which is that not necessarily, geography of sense of place, but really about the values of living in place, which I think is such an important part of farm to school as well, is that it really is a place-based education that I think is, deepens your understanding of your local communities and helps them thrive.
Yeah, yes. And I would just add to that the food system education is so student-centered, and you're going to hear probably when you hear from Woodstock High School a little bit more about this, but for students to understand their role in the food system and their ability to make change and how their choices impact their communities, their health, all these elements. There's this story I share a lot about Mount Abe High School students testifying before the Ag Committee. This is several years back, and they gave a great presentation. At the end, the committee members asked the students, okay, so really, what difference does it make? And this 8th grader or 9th grader says, you know, it makes me think twice. It makes me think what it took to put the food on my plate, and I eat it. And I understand that I don't waste it. And when my mom was sick, I did the cooking in my house, and I started a garden in the mobile home park where we live. And it's that life skills that's so hard to measure. I mean, I would love to do sort of a longitudinal look at these students who are growing up with Farm to School and the choices that they make, whether it's supporting ag policy, that, you know, you don't have to be a farmer to, you know, play a role in what's important to sustain agriculture in our state. Or, you know, they have a career in food systems, or just those life skills to be able, you know, to cook and grow food and understand what Vermont food, how important it is to our economy and to ourselves. So it's that student agency that's hard to measure, but is really important through the food system education that's happening.
Before we let you go, I just wondered about the farm to school, the coordinator positions that you talked about. I'm wondering how many supervisory unions have a designated coordinator, and is that a title that's official in some capacity? Is it in with it? Where does it exist? Where did that term come from?
Yeah, it's probably time to go back and take a look. So several years ago, we reached out to schools to try to identify farm to school coordinators and define it really openly. Like, there are garden coordinators that are part-time in schools, or sustainability coordinators, or, you know, as I mentioned, that they live in different places in the school. But we built what we called a community of practice. So right now, the Farm to School Network has monthly calls for what we call Farm to School coordinators, and that's the broadest catch-all. And so not necessarily, like when I'm referring to you, the need for Farm to School coordinators in districts, it can be broad, but specifically to really work within the school to, you know, create that change. The Farm to School coordinator calls that happen monthly, and there's an email list. I'd have to go back and look, but between probably 50 and 100, somewhere in there, is the email list. They come and go so quickly. That's really an old list. So I don't have an answer how many are in the schools. It would be good to know, and how many are sustained within the schools beyond the grants would be good to know. But the network, the Farm to School Network, is trying to create some support for those positions, as well as encouraging schools to think about how that coordination can happen.
But it's fair to say, Betsy, would it not be that we've seen so much success with schools that have farm to school coordinators, and one of the greatest challenges is, and it doesn't, which can take its form in many ways, but that it's always there's not long-term funding for that position. I think that's one of the biggest challenges, is that it's an important role within the school, and the funding isn't there for that position.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other hands. Representative Levitt, before we wrap up here. You're all set?
I'm good, thanks.
Okay.
One more comment.
Representative O'Brien.
Betsy, I noticed in one of your slides, it showed the two girls at the salad bar, and one of them had a glass of milk on a tray, which I thought, this committee dreams of that future where you can have whole milk in a glass, drink as many glasses as you want. So I don't know what school that was, or if it was a stock photo, but it was definitely aspirational.
Yeah, there are definitely a number of schools that have bulk milk dispensers, and there were grants from the Agency of Agriculture to support that equipment in the schools. So I can't tell you what the percentage is today. At one point, there was a count to, be adding more. So yes, there's interest in doing that. You'll probably hear down the road from NOFA Vermont has a project with some of their organic dairies to increase the schools using bulk milk and to be able to provide that locally.
Thank you.
Nice.
All right. Thank you both for joining us this morning.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us. And yeah, I'm so glad you're going to speak with one of the schools. And if there are others that you'd like us to recommend to speak with, we're happy to do that.
All right, great. We appreciate that. Take care.
You did?
I don't know.
You guys